So, Ibtihaj, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to start this podcast with the way I start with every guest that appears on Spolitics, and that is name the athlete or the moment that made you love sports.
Ooh, that's such a great question. Um, I don't, I would say that Serena was very pivotal in my decision to explore professional sports. But I grew up the child of, I had a family member who worked at NBC Olympics. And so every single summer or even winter games, we were just in front of the television because in my mind, my aunt played a part in making that happen. So I've been a sports baby, I think, my whole life.
Well, yeah, so I guess the answer would be it was your aunt who was responsible for you sort of that early interest that you had in the Olympics.
Oh, and the Olympics for sure. But as
Hmm.
African Americans, we're either outside or, being active, playing a sport, watching sports, I think collectively. And so sports, I think, in our family is just woven into the fabric of kind of who we are.
So, what was sort of your earliest kind of memorable Olympic memory?
Oh, definitely sitting in front of the television at my aunt's house. She's not there, but with my uncle and my family, like my siblings, my parents, sitting in front of the TV and uh, watching sports, whether it be track or field or even boxing. I remember my aunt did. There was one games where specifically she was working on boxing. So I think those are my memories. That big, box television, when TVs kind of sat in like a piece of furniture. Like I
Oh
feel
yeah,
like
I remember that box set, that big box.
right,
Yeah.
like a big wooden like piece of furniture, but it had a television in it. Like I remember watching the Olympics like that.
Mm. Now, of course, your Olympic history, and it's literally you are part of Olympic history, not just because you participated, but obviously because of what you accomplished there, and also being the first American athlete to compete in the Olympics while wearing a hijab, winning the bronze for the U.S. fencing team. But you decided to retire, and I believe you decided to retire. What was it, 2019? I think it was.
2017.
2017. Wow. Okay.
Mhm,
It seems like it's been much shorter than that.
mhm.
So when you decided that it was it for you in fencing, how did you know your fencing career was over?
I feel like a part of me knew at the games that that was going to be it. And a lot of it I think that that decision didn't always feel like it was mine. I felt like I grew tired of some of the politics that existed within my sport. It was if I had the ability to just train, and I loved, I think, all those pieces that make you, I think, a phenomenal athlete. I liked the dedication. I love the routine. I like that I could commit myself to practice, to training to get better. I kind of felt like I could always see those results. They felt very tangible to me. But it was the politics that I could never get with. And a lot of that maybe because I'm just not a combative person, but because I was faced with so much adversity, and I think a lot of it had to do with things that were out of my control, like me being ethnically different from everyone else or religiously different from everyone else. And then on top of that, our sport is an individual sport first. So in those cases, in sports like that, there's just a lot of contention that exists because the reality is people want each other's spots.
Mm.
So on this facade that you all see as spectators, especially watching the Olympics, everything seems great. There's high fives, there's hugs, but I think the underbelly of that is that you're competitors before your teammates.
Um, do you think, and we'll dive a little bit deeper because you left a lot of meat there on the table about the politics that you face. Do you think that you might have stuck in it longer if you were, let's say, like your road and path would have been different. Is a better way to phrase it. If you would have been a Christian athlete. Now we know there's not a lot of Black people in fencing,
Mhm.
but I think the religious component of this is very different. So
Mhm.
let's say you were a Christian athlete and not a Muslim athlete. Do
Mhm.
you think your pathway would have been different?
I can't honestly answer that question. I have no idea. And I that's because when you live at the intersection of different identities, you don't ever stop and ask, the person or persons who are kind of committing those bigoted acts or these discriminatory, aggressions towards you. You don't stop and ask, like, hey, is it because I'm Muslim or is it because I'm Black? You know what I mean? Is it
Mm.
because I'm better than you? Like, who knows? So I don't know if some of the things that I face and some of those obstacles were because I was Muslim, or if it had nothing to do with any of my identities. To be honest, I'll never know the answer to that. But I do have moments in my career that stand out to me because where or moments in my career that stand out to me because my religious beliefs were kind of uh, brought to the surface, when really it's like, what are my religious beliefs? How does that factor into me being on this team, or me playing a sport that I love? To me, um, why is religion even a topic of conversation within, the bounds of our team dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be. You're right, but I think because not only are you Muslim, you chose to present as Muslim by wearing a hijab, like you, and so the immediately when you show up anywhere, for some people, your very existence. I don't even think for some people, I think it's a reality. Like your existence is political to them,
Mhm.
and so immediately you're causing a reaction just by showing up. So how did you, as you were, in this sport that you love, like how did you deal with trying to shield yourself or at least protect yourself from these bigoted reactions?
When I was younger, I think that my parents played a big part. Even my brother sometimes played a big part in, like, creating that space where you felt safe. As I moved more into the professional level, a lot of it was just trying to stay true to yourself and stay really myopic in the goal. And for me, the goal was to become a better athlete. So I was never caught in the weeds in trying to be something I wasn't, or trying to present myself in ways that kind of would lessen the blows that I was getting from them. I think really just learned to ignore it. And I'm thankful, because I feel like had I gotten caught up in going back and forth or constantly feeling like I needed to defend myself, I would like they would win, because then you become distracted. Competing becomes a lot harder because you're being weighed down by these different, instances that you've now kind of unboxed in your life. And as Black athletes, we're already carrying a lot. Every time I felt like I stepped onto the fencing strip, I was carrying other people's implicit biases before, the referee even said fence. And when I was competing, I don't know if I was necessarily like super conscious of it. Subconscious, yes, but now looking back and seeing how, especially as an adult, seeing how implicit bias changes the way people interact with one another, how they treat one another. And I compete in a sport that the referee is the end all be all in the decision of who scores the point. So it it begs the question, how often are points being taken away from you? Or is the referee really being true to the sport and being honest to both athletes in, you know, um, giving the point to the person who's deserving of the point? Or does implicit bias play a part in his or her decision making.
You mentioned about just this natural burden that Black athletes are forced to carry. 2016 in Rio was your first Olympics, correct?
First and only
And
Olympics. I
first and
got
only
in,
Olympics.
got out.
um, carrying all this weight, that first and only Olympics, were you actually able in real time to enjoy the momentous achievement of being an Olympian?
No, I would say no. I My media questions were all political questions. My teammates got, "What did you eat for breakfast? How excited are you to be at the Olympics?" And my questions were about Trump. They were about the Muslim ban. They were about, my ethnic origin, things like that. And I felt like they were heavy questions that I was being dealt, and my teammates, their questions were vastly different, especially when it came to like media day or any type of, panel kind of questions that we received. And I felt it. I felt like at the Olympics, I had to be a good representation for the communities that I was a part of, whether that be the Muslim community, the Black community. I want to show people and show, most importantly, I wanted to show Muslim women that we could be successful in sport. And so I feel like a part of me already did that job by being there at the Olympics. And then winning a medal, was just icing on the cake. But it was also showing young Black kids that they could have a seat at that table, to be a part of, the fencing community. Like, still, you can go to fencing tournaments, especially in the weapon that I fence as a woman saberist, and you can find no Black athletes. And the way that I see it, there still needs to be change in our sport. And at the Olympics, I felt like, of course, I was really excited to be there, but I felt like I was carrying something with me, and a part of that is being really thankful and appreciative of the moment, but I felt like my job wasn't done.
You wound up winning the bronze, which is an incredible achievement. When you reflect on it, do you wonder if maybe they hadn't politicized your presence being there? Do you wonder how much that might have impacted how you perform?
Sometimes, I look at my individual performance, and I don't think, if I really tried, I could articulate how nervous I was. To give you an idea of a fencing tournament, like sans Olympic Games, you are in a random country, in a random venue, and the spectators are maybe whatever host country you're in. Like, say you're in Greece, maybe there's a few Greek families, but the spectators are coaches, trainers, and athletes. That's who's what. Like, we don't sell out stadiums in our sport by any stretch of the imagination. So to have that be your norm, and then go to the Olympics when there's like, you can barely even hear yourself think because there's so many people. To be honest, it felt kind of like a world championships. And you have world championships 3 times, and then you have an Olympic Games. So it's kind of that same level. And I felt that nervousness before, but for whatever reason, by the grace of God, at the team event, I felt like I just didn't have any nerves. Like, I was ready to go. And I felt like the day of the individual competition prepared me for the team event.
Um, you said a moment ago that forced out is probably too strong a words, but you felt like the overwhelming nature of the politics is what ultimately made you decide to walk away from fencing. Since making that decision, have you regretted it at all?
No, I think that my time in the sport, it was it was perfect. And had there not been COVID, maybe I would feel, some level of like, I would feel remorse in in walking away so early and not really giving myself an adequate amount of time. I competed. My first international competition, I was 21 years old, 22 years old. And for a lot of athletes in our sport, they're competing from a really, really young age. They're in an international competition at 11, 12 years old. So I feel like my career started later than most people. But when you look at my retirement in 2016, the next Olympics wasn't until 2021. And that's I mean, not only is that a large span of time, there were people training, you know, in their backyards because clubs were closed and you couldn't really, have close interaction with anyone else. So it's like, how are you training during that time? I feel like it would have been really difficult. And also a lot of my training, I had like my coaches weren't the most dependable people anyway. So I can't imagine throwing COVID in the mix and having to try to chase somebody down for, a lesson and training during a global epidemic. I think it would have been really tough.
Yeah, I guess from that perspective, considering the very next Olympics, like the whole world had changed. That I'm sure you saw what some of the athletes went through, mentally, physically, and you probably were thinking, kind of glad I'm not in it.
Oh,
But I
yeah.
guess maybe regret or remorse isn't the right answer. I just wondered if you missed it at all.
I miss it. In my day-to-day, I feel like I miss the routine. I think that in how my life is now, it's like you don't know if you're gonna be in New York or LA or if you're gonna be in Paris, like, you just don't know, and with sport, it's, you kind of we have the same World Cups every single year, and you have Pan Ams, you have World Championships, so I think that I kind of miss that, like, knowing, that I'm gonna wake up at 5:30 to go training, I have lunch, and then I have the second training, like, I kind of miss that, like, just the regimen and the schedule of training, but it's the Olympic Games where I think when I really have FOMO, and for a hot second, you're like, "I retired too early." But then the Olympics ends and you're like, "Nah, I don't miss it," you know?
So, are you able, given your own personal experience, how do you, as a viewer, like, how do you take in the Olympics now compared to that little girl growing up when you were watching it on TV in at your aunt's?
Yeah, I think it depends. So, Tokyo, I was commentating for NBC, so I felt like I was stressed out. I was working really hard. I was in communication with different coaches and different athletes, and I just felt like it was for the month leading up to the games, and then the 2 weeks of the games, I was covering the sport. But, now it's just you get to really enjoy the other sports as well. So not just fencing and, finding that one fencer who's an outlier who goes all the way, to the gold medal match, but also enjoying other sports, whether you're there in person or you're watching on television. I think as athletes competing in the games, you don't always have the ability to do that.
You said something interesting about the Paris Olympics. You said, I want to make sure that I quote you correctly. You wrote on in an Instagram caption, that is, you said that the Paris Olympics will be remembered as the games that violated human rights. What did you mean by that?
So the French Olympic Committee in September of 2023 announced that French athletes, specifically French athletes who are Muslim and observed hijab, would not be allowed to compete for, the French national team and represent France at the Olympic Games. And in my eyes and in the eyes of, anyone with a conscience and a moral compass, that is a gross, human rights violation to tell Muslim women that they're not allowed to compete. And this coming from the host country, that they're not allowed to compete in the hijab. I was shocked because yeah, I mean, France, they've been discriminating against Muslims for a really long time, and I think that they're just chipping away at a much larger, end goal when it comes to, uh, Islamophobia, to be quite frank, but for the host country to announce this and for the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, to take no substantial action at all over that next, year and yeah, over that next year, I just, I felt like we as Muslim women around the globe were let down, by the IOC, by allies, by friends, and especially by even other athletes. How can you know and be presented with this information and say nothing? To me, sports and activism go hand in hand. And I'll never understand an athlete, especially athletes of color who may come from underrepresented communities, who may face their own microaggressions within their sport, to choose to say nothing, to not lend your platform to advocate for this group of women who are being mistreated by the host country. I just felt really, really disappointed in a lot of my fellow athletes.
Now, why why do you think that is? Or do you think this is because of this particular issue? Like if it were something that were not closely tied to religion, that um and this is to give them no excuse, but like, do you think because of what it was tied to, that that made other your Olympic colleagues um less comfortable speaking out?
It's possible,
Hmm.
probable, but who
Hmm.
knows? I When you look at different sporting events around the world, when you look at even the 2016 Olympic Games in Brazil, I'm sure you remember the conversation of Zika and crime and poverty and all these different things that we were going to be met with, by this like big boogeyman that was in Brazil. I feel like you don't see that for all host countries that are hosting sporting events. Like Qatar, who hosted the World Cup. It was like human rights violations, and that's all anyone ever wanted to talk about. But where is that same energy for the Western countries or the European countries, the white countries that host these sporting events? I feel like the energy from the media is always different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably fair. It'll be very interesting to see how Los Angeles is portrayed, right?
Mhm,
Because
mhm,
American country, LA is a city that a lot of people, um, you know, whenever I go out of the country and I tell people I'm from that I live in Los Angeles, they're like, oh, like their eyes sort of light up, and so they have this very you know, um, this very ingrained perception of, oh, Hollywood and this and that. So I'm,
mhm.
to your point, even though, as we know, LA has crime, LA has
Right.
issue,
Yeah.
I'm very curious as to how this will show up
Mhm,
when it's 2028 and the Olympics are in LA. Now, you are somebody who has never shied away from using your platform and your status as an athlete to speak up on your opinion, to be outspoken, to be involved in activist causes. You have been very supportive of the fight that Palestinians are going through. Um, and you've deeply involved yourself in that issue, which, as you know, just by nature, is very polarizing for a lot of people in this country. As you begin to speak out more and on behalf of Palestinians who are, undergoing terrible atrocities in the Middle East, what has been the reaction that you've received to that when you've used your voice for an issue again that's very divisive for people?
mhm. As a Muslim American, we've talked and learned about the plight of the Palestinians for, like, to be honest, my whole life. If you go to any Muslim function, there is this conversation around the Palestinian cause. And whether it's lending financial support, there's some type of um, fundraiser that's happening, or just conversations about um, the the occupation that the Palestinians are under, and the very real existence that they live under an apartheid regime of Israel. And now, post October 7th, 2023, it seems like the tide has shifted a little, and you see more people, especially Gen Z, become hip to what's happening there.
Mhm.
And I see as a public figure the very real effects of what it means to be outspoken uh, in support of the Palestinian cause. And I see that I know friends who have lost their jobs. I've personally am experiencing shadow banning where my posts aren't seen by very many people. And it's also affected my stream of income, as it has a lot of my friends who are in my field or who kind of have the similar structure in the way that they make money. And as like, my faith teaches me to speak out against, injustice. So there's not anything that I would change personally, but it is really upsetting to watch a lot of my friends or even people that I follow now a whole entire year later, when this was bought, to everyone's television screens and in your feed, whether you like it or not, it's there. To ignore it, I think, goes against our very nature as African Americans, even. Like, if I just were to remove everyone else from the equation and say, where is the Black community? It's, to me, is shocking. I think
Mm.
a lot of the historical figures that have always meant so much to me, whether it be Malcolm X or Muhammad Ali, I feel like even those figures spoke to the plight of the Palestinians. So this isn't something that started a year ago. This is something that has been going on for decades. And to say nothing, whether it be about the genocide in Palestine, the famine that's happening in Sudan, the bombing that we're seeing in Lebanon, or just the fact that our tax dollars are funding this, to me, is infuriating. Like, we live at the very top of the tax bracket. And I'm like, so all that money you're taking out of my pocket is going to carpet bombing children. For me, it hurts me at my core. And I don't to me, it's a very helpless situation. Like, I feel helpless. And for a long time, I would say over the last year, and I've talked about this with, even my team, I've really struggled to even be present on social media because of the images that you see, but also a very real fear about even posting. We see people literally lose their job, lose their livelihood, and it becomes, I think, this internal fight of, I do want to lend my support. What happens when I do? And what is it that I'm even supposed to say? To help change our funding of the annihilation of these people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to get to with that, and especially we see the influence about how people feel about this issue, what it will have on what it is having on the national election, and especially I'm from Michigan, which has the largest Arab population outside of the Middle East, and politically, you had during Joe Biden's when he was at the time, the Democratic frontrunner running as the incumbent, there were 100,000 people who voted uncommitted, many of them who were Arab because of how the U.S. has positioned itself with its unconditional support to Israel, because there are a lot of people who feel the same way you do. Like, why are my tax dollars going to this? What are we doing? What's the strategy? Like, what is happening here? And so, certainly there have been many examples of people who just in voicing concerns and what I consider to be fair criticism, that they have been branded anti-Semitic just for asking questions. So just sort of the thought process and really the risk of expressing any kind of pro-Palestinian support, asking or raising any questions about the U.S. Involvement. Um, how concerned were you that people would label you anti-Semitic because you're clearly very well versed on the issues, but how concerned were you that you might be mistakenly labeled anti-Semitic?
Generally, I'm not super concerned about myself. I have to say that. Like, it's really more so for me and trying to encourage other people to use their platform. How many people exist on earth? There's a lot of us, and I think collectively we can, invoke real change, but we also have to believe in our power. And whether you have, 10 million followers or if you have a few followers, I think that you owe it to our global community to, uplift those who are facing such gross injustices like the Palestinians. I really, morally, I don't think it's right to sit and say nothing, or to
Mm,
say I see both sides, or even to call this a war. There are a group of people who live under occupation and live behind a wall. They don't have between security checkpoints. They are living under an ethnocracy where, because they are Muslim, because they are Arab, they are not able to have the same rights as an Israeli Jew. That is an apartheid system. That is Jim Crow, 2.0. And we as African Americans, we know what that's like. We know what it's like to live under. If you understand your history, if you understand American history, you know what that looks like and you know why it's wrong. So why now in 2024 we want to take a step back and say, "Oh, we understand both sides." Imagine not having access to clean drinking water, or not having the ability to go to school. There are, I think, 155 hospitals that have been leveled, like they don't exist in Gaza anymore. If prior to that, I went to a talk with that famous Palestinian photographer, Motaz Aziza. He was in Orange County, and he was dropping some things that I did not know. That if you were under the age of 55 in Gaza, you can't go to Jerusalem to seek medical treatment. Say you have some, I don't know, some health concern, and if you're under that age, under that threshold, you can't seek medical treatment. And if you have something like cancer, by the time you go through that whole legal system of requesting permission. He was like, most people, by the time you get permission to go to Jerusalem to seek medical treatment, he was like, you're going to die. There's no time left. That's it. And I can't imagine living in a place where my faith precedes me, my ethnicity precedes me, and I'm not given basic human rights because of the way that I was born. That is inherently wrong. And we owe it to the people of Palestine to say something and to invoke change. It's our government that is funding this and giving the green light to the Israelis to even commit things like this. And I've always found it strange, Jamal, I have to say, I have friends and I know people who say, "Oh, I went to Israel for the summer," or "I went, here, I went to Tel Aviv on vacation." And I can't imagine going somewhere and seeing this wall and seeing the lack of freedom that exists for a group of people, and then continuing on whatever, vacation I plan to have. I can't imagine it. But maybe perhaps it's because of my ancestry, I don't know. But I just can't imagine ever thinking that that was okay.
Now, as of the recording of this podcast, which is before the presidential election has taken place, there was a pretty notable group of Muslim faith leaders that endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris for president. How do you feel about such endorsements coming from the Muslim community, knowing what America's position as a country is on this issue?
where is this list? I haven't heard about this list. Like, who?
Yeah, it's in the New York. Well, it was in the New York Times is where I got it. It's a list of imams, and so
Really?
and yeah, it was, and
When
even
was this?
more so.
Recent?
I think this was over the course. Let me say, just say the last couple of weeks. I don't have the article pulled up right now,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
I read it last night in
Okay.
preparation for this because I'd heard about the endorsement before. I just never dug deep into to who it was. And as I
Mhm.
mentioned before, I know about the situation in Michigan and the uncommitted movement. They did not endorse her. They were like,
Mhm.
"Don't vote for Trump, but we ain't endorsing
Right,
her," is
right.
essentially what was their position. But in general, I'm wondering about your feelings about this election, given how personal this issue is for you and how it's impacted how you feel about it.
I can't morally vote for anyone who would encourage the bombing of any community. I don't believe I can go into the voting booth and do that. And I'm not crazy. I know that we live in a two-party system, and I understand that it's a very flawed system, but I don't think my fingers won't allow me to do it.
Mhm,
You know, I've never been so disappointed in our government. I've never been so disappointed in us as a community. And it was been so interesting over the last few weeks to even see people who are super pro Palestine flip and become hardcore Harris supporters. Because to me, that I mean, there's those two things contradict one another. You know, she has said she has unequivocally supported Israel's right to defend itself. And I just can't imagine how me, as someone who is very pro Palestine, um, could ever vote for anyone who believes that in this moment it is right to kill this community. I
mm,
can't see it.
do you would you I hate to use a label, but to use a label, would you consider yourself an uncommitted voter?
You know, I've never publicly talked about my views on, different uh I would say different political candidates. And maybe that's because of my very real trauma from the Olympics and being forced, I think,
Yeah,
to publicly talk about all these
yeah,
things.
right.
But, I'm not here to tell people who they should vote for. I think that I'm really just trying to help shine a light on something that is happening in real time and hoping that people see how grotesque it is and see how we have to change, I think, from the inside out. How can we watch this and know that we play a part, whether or not we want it? Our tax dollars are funding it. And I will not say that I have all the answers or that I'm necessarily doing the right thing. This is just how I feel, and I'm not here to try to encourage or discourage anyone from doing anything. That's just my very real personal stance on the issue.
Yeah, it is interesting over the course of my life. Like I remember as a young voter, and granted, there's not even though the U.S.'s support of Israel stretches back decades, right?
Mhm.
Um, the one I have, social media has definitely changed how people saw the issue when I was a young voter versus now. And
Mhm.
a lot of that is led by, as you mentioned, Gen Z, who has been able to sift through some of this and say, hey, stop. And so while obviously it's not ultimately what you want, you want the violence to stop, but does it at least give you some measure of hope and encouragement, the fact that it does feel like people are asking questions more so than they did before?
I think so. I think that as a Muslim, I have to have faith. I have to have faith that there's going to be change. And I think that part of that is a part of, true advocacy. that the what you're working towards. And right now it feels like we are in the trenches. I think collectively as a Muslim community, I think that this is like 9/11 for us in terms of the Islamophobia and the very real like hate the Muslim community is getting. We're back to that Arab boogeyman, this sensationalized thing that we all experienced as kids in 9/11. And now I feel like, my nieces and nephews will have to unfortunately experience as they grow up. I
I
feel
was
like
going
we
to ask you that because
step
with
back.
the ramped up, with it being a an election year, and we everybody's heard Trump talking about, he brought in a a Muslim ban before about expanding that ban if he gets another term in office. And, I didn't want it to feel like a inappropriate comparison because I remember very much what the climate was like for Muslims after 9/11. Um, yeah, I was going to ask you, like, how do you feel like it's worse than it was after 9/11?
I was so young 9/11, so I can't speak to, what adults necessarily were experiencing. But I do remember people like changing their names, like shortening their names, like, kind of removing religious markers, whether that be the way that they dressed or the way that they like publicly appeared, so that they wouldn't be, um, you know, not necessarily, yeah, like mislabeled, or even so that people wouldn't see their faith first, so that their faith, like wouldn't precede them. And now I feel like social media has really changed everything. I think it's given a lot of us courage that we didn't have in the past. Like I don't think we're our parents' generation. People are like, yeah, I may lose my job, but here's what I have to say. I'm not my parents. I'm not my grandparents. I'm different. And because of social media, because of our access to information, I think that Gen Z, Muslim or not, we have more access to more. Like it's not that the news just can't tell you a lie and you're going to run with that lie and think that that's and accept it as truth. Now you can say, no, actually, that's not true. I've done my research and I know, that what you've said and what you've told us is A plus B equals C is actually, incorrect and it's not true. And so I think that we're a bit more fearless as millennials and Gen Z, and that we are ready to burn it all down, whether it's the uncommitted or people who don't want to necessarily put themselves in the box. We're like, no, we will see change in our lifetime by hook or by crook.
Mm. Um, you talked about what your life looks like now. Given the fact that you're all over the country all the time. Before we even started this podcast, the first thing I asked you is like, where exactly are you? Having this conversation with me from because you are generally all over the place. But nevertheless, one of your post fencing career lanes has been in children's books,
Mm.
and you've got a New York Times bestselling children's book series, which is spectacular. And I extra relate to this now because I am also in the process of finishing my children's book as well. Um, but what made children's books kind of a comfortable space and a lane for you?
I knew when I got my book deal for my memoir, and this was, I think, back 2017, in the back of my mind, I knew I wanted to go into children's literature. And so much of my journey as a person, as an athlete, has been to invoke change. And to be honest, it's never at the forefront. It wasn't at the forefront of my mind, when I was a kid, even coming up through fencing. I just knew that I was always one of one in spaces. And so that journey began to look different when I looked at Team USA and said, hey, there's never been a Black woman on the US women's saber team. And I knew it in my mind, I could do it. I didn't have any credentials or any of um, kind of those medals or anything that would attest to my ability to do it. I just believed in myself and I was like, this is something I'm going to do, if not for me, for like my younger self, right? I wanted young Black girls to be able to see themselves in that space. I wanted young Muslim girls to be able to see themselves in this space. And I feel like it's been the same with children's literature. When I was a kid, you didn't have books. Like I used to read Babysitter's Club. There weren't any black characters in
I
that book,
remember that.
right? You
Yes.
really tried to relate to the stories, but it's not the same. It is not. Even American Girl, the black doll in the black character in the American Girl series was a slave. Looking back, I can't believe my
Ooh.
parents let me read this. And
I did
our
not know that because I mean I'm older than you, so I'd heard of this the series before. I didn't know it was a slave.
she
No, she
was
was a
a
slave.
slave. Her name was Addie. I had this doll. I still have this doll at my parents' house. All of the
Wow.
things that came with Addie were connected to her living in like slave quarters. She had this broom, she had this like straw bed, like it's wild. But that was our reality as children. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna be the change and I'm gonna write these books. And um it was something I feel like was just long overdue. I had never had a book as a kid that had a character in hijab. I had never seen the story of hijab told from the perspective of a Muslim family that wasn't demonized, that wasn't about oppression, that didn't come from some man. It's like everything about what I know of hijab and to me within our community is not what you see on TV. It's like for us, it's very normal for you to wear hijab and it's a part of our culture as Muslims. I love that The Proudest Blue, my first children's book, tells the story of hijab in a way that's so beautiful, but how the younger sister Faiza sees Asia's first day of wearing hijab as this beautiful marker, and when Asia does experience bullying, you see what she does in that moment, and she never, like holds on to the words that the bully says. And to me, you don't have to be Muslim to get the message of the book. It's that, bullying may happen, but, those words of the bully aren't yours to keep. And so it's about being proud of who you are. And with the kindest red, it's about kindness. Like who doesn't want to impart the value of kindness, to their children? And what I love about my newest book, The Boldest White, it is, I don't know if you can see the cover, but I love that it's my first book that has both the characters, Faiza and Asiya and hijab, on the cover. But it's also, a story about fencing. It's a story about faith and about bravery and all the things that I feel like I had to be brave. I had to be resilient. I had to work hard in order to realize my dreams as an Olympic medalist. And um, I just like that with children's literature, you're able to create and show children what they can be. And that's something that's often missing, I think, for us as adults. We kind of get to a point where we harden and we're like, no, this is my baseline. This is who I am. And with children, it's just kind of limitless imagination. And I can't wait for, more kids to read this book and maybe even go out and try fencing. There's a lot of missed opportunity when it comes to these more niche sports like lacrosse or hockey or fencing. I think that once we as African Americans get a hold of them, we're just going to like take off and it'll blow up. But we're still, I think, we're still at the start. We're still at the beginning of the race in that journey.
How do you, uh, if you could sort of put it, capsize it, like how do you want children to feel after they read The Boldest White?
I want them to feel brave. I want them to think about fear from a different perspective. We're even as adults, we all have moments of doubt. We all are afraid to try new things. But in The Boldest White, you see Faiza practice with her sister. You see her practice at home. She fences in her bedroom. She does a shadow fencing, with a mirror. And that's exactly what sport is. Sport is you practicing and you practicing and you practicing until you become better, until you kind of find that inner lioness or lion where you're just like, you embody. all of those things that you've practiced, and you believe it. And I think that that's what the boldest white is. It's about being bold, being brave, and being fearless. And it doesn't always have to be in sport. I think it can be in, different avenues in your life, but it's a choice. I think being brave is a choice, and I think that we all have the ability to make that decision.
Do you see writing children's book as sort of something you'll do like the rest of your life? I'm not saying it's the only thing because you do so many, but like, does this feel like you've discovered like a real like passion here?
It's always after the book tour, because this is my third children's book, and it's always after
Mhm.
the book tour when I'm like, you know how touring is for a book. You're exhausted, but
Yes.
I can't wait for you to get into children's literature, Jamel, because the children's book tour is different. It's, an adult touring, you're very, very heavy questions, and it's like mentally, physically, it could be like really draining. But with children's books, yeah, you're physically tired at the touring, but um there's there's this levity that's there, and um the kids are so cute. I don't know. I wish that I had a series like this as a kid. Like on tour, Jamal, I meet parents who have named their children after characters in the book, which
Mm.
is, I'm so cute. I'm like, I love this. I met a baby who was named after Faiza. She was the fifth child of this family, but they're like, no, this series is like every night we are reading these books to our kids. And when we were thinking about, baby names, we're like, Faiza, that's perfect. And so I don't know. In my mind, because I'm competitive, I could see me having like a rainbow of books. Like we have red, we have white, we have blue. Maybe the next one's purple, maybe it's green. Who knows? But I don't know what the future holds. But as we say in our faith, we say, "Inshallah, God willing." Whatever's meant to be will be.
That's great because you're right. And I followed kind of your path. Memoir came first.
Mhm.
Now it's a children's book. And because you are exposing yourself so much in a memoir, and in my case, some sort of dark elements of my childhood, I was like, you're asked the heaviest questions
You
ever.
are
Yeah. And it is a
right.
little taxing.
Therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It
Mhm.
is. And one thing that was interesting about writing a children's book is I had to write optimistically. Like I believed in the world.
Right.
And
You
right,
know
and I was like, "Ooh."
the world is a dark, scary,
Right.
crappy place. Yeah.
Exactly. I was like, I had to actually put aside the fact that I think the whole universe is on fire and be like, I have to
Mhm.
give these kids something to hope for.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was a challenge on onto itself. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that about how you had people who named their kids after your characters because I was one of my questions was for you is like what are some of the most memorable interactions that you've had with children and their parents
Mhm.
on your book tours?
I think that fencing clubs around the country owe me a cut because Muslims are fencing. Can't even tell you how many kids come in their fencing kit. They bring their mask or they'll bring a glove for you to sign. And my sister and I, we were, I think, one of two Muslim families at our club. And I went to a club in the middle of Manhattan on, 25th Street, 25th and 7th is where I fenced. So this was a huge club, had a lot of people, but didn't have Muslims fencing, not even a ton of African Americans. So to see that through these books, or even through, like my young adult adaptation of my memoir, I think that it's creating space for kids who look like us to say, okay, I can try fencing. Let my parents do a deep dive and find fencing in my area. And I don't believe that everyone needs to fence. I know that it's very expensive. I don't think that everyone should necessarily fence. I just really believe in children being active. So I love that kids are fencing. I'm always encouraging the parents at these book signings to make sure they're putting their kids in a sport at some level at some point, because I do think it creates a framework of being active and taking care of your body that you carry, throughout your life.
Might we one day see you with a fencing academy?
Uh, I mean, we'll see. I'm working on some things. I tried coaching. I coached when I was training. I coached my high school team. My sister was on it, and You know what I don't like? I don't like having to repeat myself. I feel like once I've said it, that should be it. You need to just do it. And with kids, I mean, they have to hear it, 50, 11 times before they do it. So,
All right. So you don't know if you have the patience to do this.
coaching is not for everybody.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Ipti, before I get you out of here, I'm going to ask you the messy question, the question designed for controversy. All right. Which is crazy to say after we discussed the war in the Middle East. But,
Right, exactly.
all right. This is the messy question for you. You once gave Michelle Obama a fencing lesson. Did you uh, stick, stab, poke? I don't know what the terminology, the first lady.
No, it's funny. I was given no heads up that I was giving Michelle Obama a lesson. I am standing in the middle of Times Square in this designated area. I'm with a bunch of little kids and I'm just waiting. And this Secret Service starts to show up, but you can't even tell. They're just standing around with their back to you and they have these earpieces in. No one tells me what I'm waiting for, by the way. And then she just appears. It was like a light shined on her as she walked over. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, like this is happening. This is like Michelle Obama. And I'm sure to keep everything safe, we had foam weapons. There was no no real saber, no real fencing sword in the mix. And just teaching her, how to move forward, how to step back, how to lunge. It was quick. It was in and out. But definitely I think one of my most memorable moments fencing.
I was gonna say, don't tell me you sat up there and just completely humiliated the first lady. Like, let me show you
No,
something.
not at all. I would never. But I'm like, Michelle, is it too late for her to run? Are we stuck with the candidates we have now?
More importantly, Michelle does not want to run, as she
Oh,
has said a billion times. It ain't
I
for
know,
her.
but we all do things we don't want to do, and I feel like she
you,
could save the country right now.
you saying that she need to take one for the team?
Exactly. She and Barack have to take one for the team.
That is funny. Well, Ifti, thank you so much for joining me here on Politics and discussing all these different things. And of course, good luck with this latest iteration of your children's books. All of them are, I just think it's such a fantastic series. And again, I have a different appreciation for them going through my own journey. And, you know, years from now, I don't know if you thought about this, much like how we look at Ludacris, not we, but Ludacris, there's a generation that looks at Ludacris and LL Cool J and they don't realize they were rappers before. They're like, oh, they're an actor. So people might be looking at you like, oh, she used to fence. Oh, no, no, I just know her as an author. So
Oh
be
yeah.
careful.
Well, I mean, here's hoping, but I have to thank you for always having me on your platforms, and you are my favorite sports journalist ever, and
Oh,
I always look up to you. So thank you again.
I appreciate it. And as always, your face card is never declined, man. Face be beat. One of these days, you're going to
I
have to give me a.
I think we look alike. I have always
What?
maintained that we look alike. I know we're related. I know. I'm gonna do the
All right.
23.
23. I did it already. So my people come from Kentucky and Alabama and Oklahoma. So I'm just just
I'm like,
if there's
let me
any
get my
threads,
parents on the phone right now.
I'm saying, I'm like, they got any Crittenens, any hills, like yo, that my
Tell people that we're cousins. No one's gonna question it.
listen. I think it'll work. It'll be, but you might all of a sudden inherit another sister because people are always telling me and Renee Montgomery look alike. That is like the number one athletic doppelganger that I get is Renee Montgomery. But I'm adding you to the list. It's like, y'all didn't know this my sister? What? What
Right?
are we doing?